Hello and welcome back to Highway to Hoover, a production of SEC Extra over at D1Baseball.com. I'm your host, Joe Healy, joined as always by my good friend and co-host, Mark Etheridge. Our season preview series for the 2025 SEC campaign is well underway. Today, we're going to talk about the Florida Gators as part of that series. Before we get to that, very fun announcement. This episode of Highway to Hoover and every episode of Highway to Hoover until further notice is brought to you by Academy Sports and Outdoors. Which is exciting for me because that was a big part of my childhood in Houston. Academy, a big brand down there. Actually, I had a friend who worked for Academy, like in one of their offices they had down in Houston. So how about that? But yeah, basically every new glove, new bat, new pair, new baseball belt when I would inevitably bust one. All of that stuff, cleats. At the beginning of every season, that stuff all came from Academy for me growing up. So we're excited about the partnership here at D1 Baseball. In addition to just putting its name on some stuff, there's some kind of fun ideas coming down the pike with Academy. So we're excited about all of that as well. So cool stuff. Just wanted to get that in on the top. Obviously, we'll have a more polished ad read and presentation as time goes on, but this is a very new development. But if you're watching on the video, you can see their logo up there with us here as part of Highway to Hoover. All right, Mark, let's talk Florida. And I think my big picture thing that I think about with Florida is that I am not sure whether we can take anything from Florida's 2024 season. And by that, I mean, in most cases, how a team performs in one season does kind of inform how you feel about that team moving forward. Take, for example, A&M, right? That was a team that was one win away from a national title and they got better. So it's like, okay, well, that clearly is our national title front runner going into the season.
Yeah.
Kentucky, on the other hand, we talked about this in their episode, like they lost basically every major contributor save for a couple from a team that got to the College World Series. And so, okay, we understand that means the default position is probably a step back. Florida is so tough for me because they got where they wanted to go ultimately. However, much like when we talked about with LSU, like, they really had to work hard for it. They lose one or two more games and we're probably having a different conversation about the Gators.
They were a game over 500, which made them eligible.
Right, exactly. Yeah, that's right. I forgot about that. That it was almost less about their conference record. All that was part of it, but they needed to get over 500 to be eligible for the
They had to win 2 out of 3 at Georgia to accomplish that.
Gosh, I'd forgotten about that detail. That's crazy. Which I think even makes my point even more. But then they get hot, and it's like, okay, we always knew this was a possibility because this team is so talented. So they get to Omaha, and they look pretty good in Omaha. They fall a little bit short. So now what I'm left with is, okay, this team is still clearly talented, but this wasn't to me when they were struggling last season. This wasn't to me just that the schedule was just rough. Although it's the SEC, I get it. But like they went through stretches where they weren't hitting. The offense was stagnant. It was Cags and nobody else for long stretches, or at least that's the way it felt. On the mound, they went through some struggles. Like, they experimented with Neely in the rotation. Cade Fisher didn't pitch as well as they had anticipated. The freshman took a while to come around. And so I'm kind of left wondering if there's much of anything we can extrapolate from that, because yes, okay, those young pitchers led by Liam Peterson should be better, but you also don't have Cags. And the offense there's some new faces, but it's a lot of the same guys. And is that offense going to work without basically a superhero hitting in the middle of it? So I'm fascinated. Like, obviously we have them ranked high. I don't disagree with the ranking, but I still am kind of left wondering if I have any clue how to feel about this team going into the season.
Well, you lost the best two-way player in recent history anyway in the sport, in the college game. I mean, he was phenomenal, just larger-than-life figure. And the best closer in Brandon Neely, who was their best pitcher. but you got a lot of pieces back from a team that played in playoff mode for really the second half of their entire season. So that's a battle tested group. If you're looking for reasons to believe, those guys, they played a lot. They were in a lot of high leverage situations, and towards the end, certainly the Georgia series, and then the postseason run came through. And it was more than just Kaggs and Neely during that piece. They had contributions from other guys that honestly didn't give you what you needed during the regular season, that put you in that spot where they had to be so perfect down the stretch. So yeah, to your point, it's a fascinating team to follow, but they are experienced and they've added some pieces to be excited about. I mean, with Kyle Jones, Blake Sear, those are two impact transfers. Jones, an athletic center fielder; Sear, a big bat who's probably going to play in the outfield. Um, you know, Brendan Lawson is a potential impact freshman, a mature physical kind of bat. Where he plays, he may get a shot at first base, may play some third, may DH some, but if he hits like they're expecting him to, he's going to be in the lineup, and that's so that's where you have all those guys who are coming back, plus you add some some impact transfers or newcomers, we'll call them, to try to fill that Kaggs void, right? Because one guy can't do it. You're going to need the returnees to step up their game, and they're capable, and you're going to need these newcomers to flourish. So it's kind of weird, because you think about Florida, they're definitely one of the halves in the sport, and for me, I kind of like having all that experience, and maybe they're a quote dark horse as a national title contender, but they're Florida. But the other side, they're picked sixth in the SEC. Okay, so a sixth place team in a conference, you're terrible, right? But we've got to switch our way of thinking, because these conferences are so bloated, and all this power is consolidated into it, that you can be sixth or eighth or 10th in some of these leagues, and it's not just the SEC, and be a really good team that can make a run. And that's what's going to be, when you look at a team like Florida. I mean, I wouldn't be surprised if they're in Omaha, but you wouldn't either. Sully he should have a timeshare there, because he's going to be there every summer, it seems. So they're going to be in the mix. And I think last year's regular season was an anomaly. They're not going to go through that again, because they're older, and we can talk about the pitching, but they're not going to have to depend on freshmen. If freshmen contribute, great, but they're not going to have to run them out there in key situations time and time again, as they did a year ago.
Boy, not to derail us a little bit, Mark, but man, has the size of the conferences ever been so stark for you than when we're like looking at preseason field of 64? It's like the Big Ten added 4 teams, and 3 of them might be among the best teams in the league right away. And so it's like, how do you do that? Like, how do you figure out how many teams you're supposed to give them in the postseason? Because, we think of the Big Ten as, it's 3 probably at minimum most years, 5 if they're good. But it's like, well, there's 17 teams or whatever in that league. And
that's a podcast in itself. I mean, we can dive into, what should it be? What do we think it's going to be? Right. And then, and then probably somewhere in between is where it falls.
Yeah. Yeah. Moving on the Florida side of it, I you mentioned a couple of names there on the position player side that I'm particularly interested in, and one of which is Kyle Jones, the Stetson transfer, who there was so much buzz coming out of the fall with him, and I was in Gainesville and kind of saw it firsthand, where obviously the speed stands out, both on the bases and as a center fielder. He's one of those center fielders that really just kind of glides under balls, like he looks like, he's running full speed and he's faster than anybody on the field, but his head never moves, like one of those types of the smooth gliders. So that there's that. But the thing about him is that he is not this kind of spindly, 5'11", speedy. Like he's 6'3". I think it's 195, 200. Like
Mhm.
it's the guy. And I'm not a strength coach, but even I kind of look at his frame and I'm like, oh, you put 20 pounds on that guy and he's going to be a monster. And,
Mhm.
and there's the bat speed is there. The strength is there. I mean, it was might've been the first pitch of this exhibition. If it wasn't, it was definitely the first at bat. He was hitting leadoff against USF and
Right.
he just ambushes a ball and hits a screamer onto the berm and behind the left field wall in Gainesville for a leadoff home run. And, that to me, that shows that, oh, wow, this is, I mean, if he's able to really barrel a ball like that at this point, as he gets stronger and more mature, like there really is first, second round type of potential with him if he's able to still be a good runner, still play center field,
Yeah.
and he adds a little bit of strength. I mean, there's everything there for him to be a complete package of a player.
Yeah, he's one of the guys I'm most excited about. I'll actually be in Gainesville opening weekend and see them. And they host Air Force. I'll be there for the second and third game of that weekend series, and that's something I'm interested in seeing. And apparently, Colby Shelton has continued his body transformation. Remember last year, he was this, as a freshman, he was kind of a little soft, and then he lost a ton of weight, right, and got faster, quicker, and looked like a shortstop. Well, during this offseason, he's added to that, that slimmer frame with a lot of bulk, and he's put on 15 pounds of muscle and been able to keep that same quickness. So what does that do to his swing? What does that do to him defensively? All these questions. It's, because the power's there, but last year at times it was kind of an all or nothing approach. And the question is, for him to get where he wants to go and be an elite draft choice and make it to the show, it's got to be better plate discipline. It's got to be using the whole field, and it's got to be just an overall uptick in production to go with his physical tools, which he has. So that's another guy I'm really interested to see position
And I
wise.
think importantly on him, I think if you were to tell me, Joe, you can pick one Florida player and see their stat line before the
Mm-hmm.
season, will give you their in-season stat line to give you a better idea of how good Florida will be. I'd pick Colby Shelton for a lot of the reasons you enumerate, where last year it kind of got to a point where he'd barrel up really well 2 balls every weekend. And
Yeah.
one would get out and one would go for a double, or maybe 2 would get out, whatever it is. But outside of that, I mean, it wasn't a ton. It was a lot of strikeouts. He hit about 250.
Mm-hmm.
He walks some, but not a ton. And so it was kind of the point where if he wasn't hitting the ball out of the ballpark, it felt like sometimes you weren't getting a whole heck of a lot from him. So him being a more complete hitter, to your point, I think is, to me, that's like the number one indicator of, what kind of team is for. It doesn't all come down to him, obviously, but
Mm-hmm.
to me, that's a big chunk of it.
Yeah, that is. And plus, now he's one of the older guys. Last year he was this new hotshot transfer who was coming in, and now he's a program guy, right? Because he's been there a couple of years and can help with the culture and that kind of stuff. Speaking of that, Ty Evans is he was injured late last year, missed their postseason run, but he's got a really really good bat. Can be a middle of the lineup kind of guy, can be an impact player. And, you think about, with Cade Curlin, with Luke Heyman, and Evans and Shelton and Brody Donay, and you've got people who've been in the program a while who understand what Sully and the staff are trying to do and can help from the intangible piece. And if they raise their production, because these are all talented players who could easily surpass last year's numbers, then you're talking about a really good offense. And if it's anywhere near as what they're capable of, it's it's an Omaha team. So that's there's a lot of ifs in there, but if those guys, we're not asking them to do something they're not capable of. So I'm really kind of bullish on Florida at this point if all those things come into line, because you're not, they're not stretch goals. I think these are obtainable. It's just a question of, what's it going to look like, in April and May.
Then on the mound, we've alluded to it a couple of times. It feels like the the real centerpiece of this whole operation is what do you get from sophomores Liam Peterson and Jake Clemente in the rotation. Peterson figured it out, midway to the 2/3 mark of the season, pitched a lot better. Then it felt like when they got to the postseason, and I was there for the start against Clemson, that just really did not go well in the Super Regional. It felt like maybe just out of gas a little bit. It's a lot of innings for a freshman who's just never thrown like that. So maybe that was it, or maybe it was just, hey, there's a lot of tape on that guy by the time Clemson rolls in there, and Clemson was obviously really good. Maybe that's all it was. But you like that he did turn things around in season. That's a hard thing to do. Obviously, there's no question about the stuff. And then Jake Clemente, the big thing is what he did on the Cape, and is he able to translate that to a spring season back on campus? Because on the Cape, he looked like a guy that, and especially if Florida's only asking him to be the Sunday guy or something, like you're looking at a guy who's in really good position to be that. It's obviously it's the velocity's good, but the fastball rides. And so that can be an elite pitch. The question with him is going to be secondary stuff. But as you and I have talked about before, again, especially if they're looking at him as potentially a Sunday guy, you're asking him to get, 12 to 15 outs probably. Yeah. And so it's not like he needs to be, Paul Skeens with his variety of pitches to be able to get through the lineup twice. And so we'll have to see there. But to me, those guys are the centerpieces. Pierce Capola also back, and there were positive signs last year. You just always worry with his injury history that it'll be something. We'll see, but I do think it's really good news that it doesn't necessarily feel like they're looking at Pierce Capola as he has to be great for this operation to really be successful. I don't think it's like that. I think they've got enough depth and enough quality where that's not the case. And if he gives you 15 starts and he's healthy, then great. And we'll go from there, but not banking on him necessarily having to be a level of durable that we just haven't seen from him.
Yeah. Well, I think, last year with Liam Peterson, he would tantalize you, right? You would look at that, look at the stuff and some of the results and go, oh my God, this is first rounder, right? And then something bad would happen. And then 2 bads would happen and 3 bads would happen. And he just couldn't really kind of work through it. And again, it's a freshman in the SEC. That was a new world for him. Well, now he has that to build off of, that experience and that maturity to go through it. And you understand, okay, well, everybody gets hit. Paul Skeens gets hit, right? And it's how you respond and how you pitch in those situations that will define you. And that's what, we're all going to be looking to see what happens as these freshmen. Now they're not freshmen anymore. Great. I echo what you said on Clemente. I think he's one of the keys to the team. I think he could end up being, if he and Peterson end up pitching the way they're capable of, that could be a 1-2 punch that really stacks up with the best in the country. And a guy I'm really fascinated to see is Aiden King, freshman. I mean, he looks like the next one. Florida always seems to have this freshman arm who's going to be amazing. I think that's somebody to watch. If Capola ends up either not going deep in games or doesn't stay in the rotation, that would be somebody to watch to either piggyback or even to replace him in the rotation. Another guy I wanted to touch on is Alex Philpott. Last year he was like a 90 to 94 guy. And this fall came out and he started the fall about that from a velocity standpoint. And by the end, he was 94 to 98. And, he had pretty good pitchability. So now he's 98 with workable pitchability. I mean, he could be a lockdown closer for them if that continues. So that's a weapon that maybe, we weren't counting on them having that could be a potential game changer with Luke McNeely, at the back end. I mean, they've got there's some options back there. So I'm really excited to see how Florida works it, what roles people end up in. And like anyone else, there's going to be some trial and error till they find the right mix. But certainly, I think I like this year's staff more than last year. Maybe there's not a Brandon Neely at the end of the game, but I think everywhere else it's elevated compared to a year ago.
I'll give a shout out here too to Billy Barlow, a transfer
Yeah.
from Clemson, because he's a type of pitcher that Florida doesn't always have, which is that they've got stuff in spades. Like they've got pros all over the place, or guys that have at least the potential to be pros. And Billy Barlow will probably also get his shot at pro ball. Like he's not a mid 80s slop tosser, but he's just a veteran sinker guy who has just pitched in a lot of games at Clemson. And he's been a starter. He's been a closer. He's been a midweek guy. He's been a long reliever. He's done pretty much everything for a program that's won a lot of games. And so just to have kind of a piece you can go to that it's like, yeah, he's not going to blow your doors off, but he's also not going to come in there and have the moment be too big for him. And sometimes it does feel like on some of these pitching staffs that have been really prospect-y for Florida, like sometimes it doesn't hinder them, but it doesn't feel like they always have like just a nice college arm they can come in and go to who's like 23 years old or whatever. They can go out
Will McIntyre. Right.
Yeah. It's a good comp. Yeah.
Yeah. Especially if you're a stuffed staff and you come in and give them that different look, right? Just a guy who knows how to compete. I love that. I mean, with Florida traditionally hadn't always played so great in midweek games, and it's got them in trouble. Maybe you run your stud arm out there, and he only gets you 2 innings, and then you come in with Barlow and let him clean up the mess and let your offense get to work and settle things down. I love that, having that somebody that you can trust for that role.
Mark, one final thing before we let the folks go. I've mentioned before on episodes that if you leave us a review on Apple Podcasts, give us 5 stars, and in the body of the review, if you leave us a question, we'll be happy to answer it on the show. We got one of those from DAVNC85, his review on Apple Podcasts. He asked a pretty straightforward question, and I think we can answer this with regards to the best player, let's say in the SEC this season, which I think would probably also double as the best player in the country, unless you're a big Jamie Arnold guy or something. And the best college player that we've ever seen. So the question was simply, who's the best college player in your opinion? So we'll go with best in the SEC. We'll go with best that we've ever seen. I guess I would go Jace Laviolette for the best player in the country. I'm curious if you have any other nominations there, but he would be the guy that comes to mind.
Yeah, heading into the year, he's the guy. Just the physical tools, the production, the team he's going to be on. He's going to be in all these great moments all year in these super series. A&M, they go on the road. There's some really tough road trips for A&M. They go to, obviously the Austin one will be fun, and they go to Tennessee and they go to Arkansas. I mean, there's a lot for them to kind of wade through. So I think he's going to be in those big moments and have a chance to shine.
I also will give us a curveball here. Best Florida player of all time. And I'm not qualified maybe to really answer that question, but for me, I appreciated the Wyatt Langford story. Just that goes from not really being a factor to being a guy who all of a sudden is basically a big leaguer by the time he gets drafted, in terms of his maturity, his ability to produce, all that stuff. So, I mean, they've obviously had a lot of good players come through there, but to me, I mean, going back to David Eckstein, classic Florida Gator. But yeah, so he really stands out to me just for the story of it. Wyatt Langford.
Yeah. If you go way back, it's Brad Wilkerson. I mean, he was just an absolutely phenomenal college player.
Matt Laporta was a nice, really good college player.
Really slug it.
Yeah.
But I just the aura that Cags had. I know that,
sure.
It was just different. I mean, you would have people in the stadium before the game. He would take his first BP at bat and people would stop and look, where, they stopped their conversations because of how it sounded off his bat. And you didn't want to miss that. It was just, that was different. We just don't see that, really. Maybe there's a player every, 5 to 10 years who captures your nation that way and your attention. But yeah, that's it. And I think probably a big picture. I mean, Paul Skeens was just as fascinating and dominant a pitcher as I covered. And that's another recent guy, right? And I've been doing this 25 years or more. So he was that good just right away and came in, on a really good team, stacked team. And he didn't have to be perfect, but he almost was every week, and just didn't have a bad outing.
Yeah, his entire career, it's like the LSU stuff plus 2 years of being a two-way guy playing for Team USA and training to be a fighter pilot all at the same time.
Again, great story.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, impressive. It just goes to show the quality of the players we have in college baseball these days. A throwback one for me, totally different part of the country, but one of the first college players I remember being aware of, like, holy cow, this guy just controls the game, is Mark Kotze at Cal State Fullerton. True two-way guy where he was, they used him in relief, but he was truly the best arm they had and was the best offensive player. And you talk to anybody who played on the West Coast around that time, and they just say that it felt like you couldn't beat Fullerton with Mark Kotze because he was basically, to the extent you can in baseball, he was going to put the team on its back. And they won a title with him, basically doing that. So that's my all-time nomination there is a West Coast guy, as a West Coast nomination for that award there. Again, send us a message at Apple Podcasts, 5 stars, leave a question in the review. We'll be happy to answer it on a future episode. And as part of it, we will shoehorn your team into it. If we are, like we did with Florida just here, if we are doing another preview episode, we will shoehorn that team into the question somehow to make it as relevant as possible. We appreciate everyone who does so there. All right, that is going to do it for this edition of the Highway to Hoover podcast, a production of SEC Extra over at d1baseball.com. Once again, thank you to Academy Sports and Outdoors, the presenting sponsor of this and every episode of Highway to Hoover. Really excited about that partnership and what could come of it in the future. Thank you to Mark, as always, for joining me, and thank you, the listeners, for listening.